"Ma'am, you are standing in the wrong place." The words echoed across the federal courtroom with enough sharpness to silence every whispered conversation before the morning session had even begun. Captain Maya Carter slowly lifted her eyes from the thick folder resting against her chest and looked toward the uniformed officer standing beside the courtroom entrance. Around her, polished oak benches stretched beneath tall windows where early sunlight spilled across the marble floor in long golden bands. Lawyers quietly organized legal pads. Reporters adjusted notebooks. Jurors had not yet entered. The judge's bench remained empty beneath the American flag hanging motionless against the paneled wall. Everything felt orderly, measured, predictable, until that single sentence changed the atmosphere. Officer Daniel Brooks stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking softly across the stone floor. His posture reflected complete confidence, the quiet certainty of someone accustomed to giving instructions without expecting questions. His eyes paused briefly on Maya's simple navy suit, then on the government-issued folder she carried, before returning to her face with unmistakable skepticism. "Witnesses wait outside until they are called," he said. Maya answered politely. "I appreciate the reminder, officer. I was instructed to report directly inside courtroom 3 before the hearing begins." Daniel extended his hand. "Identification." Maya nodded without hesitation. Every movement remained calm, deliberate, almost effortless. She reached into her leather portfolio, removed a government identification card, and placed it carefully into his hand. Daniel examined it for only a moment before his expression tightened. "This does not explain why you are carrying restricted legal materials." Maya maintained steady eye contact. "The documents are authorized for today's proceedings." Daniel looked toward the folder again. "Who authorized that?" "The United States Attorney's Office." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Convenient answer." Maya did not react. Years earlier, during endless hours of military training, she had learned that composure was often the strongest response to misplaced confidence. She simply folded her hands lightly in front of her and waited. Several attorneys quietly glanced toward the exchange before returning to their notes. A courtroom clerk paused while arranging exhibits, sensing the tension but saying nothing. Outside, the faint rumble of traffic drifted through the courthouse windows before disappearing into silence again. Daniel handed the identification card back without lowering his guarded expression. "I will need to verify everything before you go any farther." Maya accepted the card with a small nod. Of course. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she stood quietly beneath the morning light, her posture reflecting years of discipline rather than frustration. Hanging from one shoulder was a worn brown leather bag that had traveled with her through airports, military bases, and federal buildings across the country. Its edges showed years of careful use, yet every document inside remained perfectly organized. Daniel noticed the precision immediately. It contrasted sharply with the assumptions forming in his mind. He stepped aside only long enough to speak into the radio clipped to his shoulder, requesting additional verification from courthouse security. While waiting for a response, he continued watching Maya as though expecting uncertainty to appear on her face. None came. Maya glanced briefly toward the empty witness stand positioned only a few yards away. In less than an hour, testimony presented in this room would influence a federal investigation that had taken months to prepare. Every statement would matter. Every document had been reviewed repeatedly. Every minute counted. Yet none of that urgency appeared in her expression. She simply breathed slowly and remembered the words her father had repeated throughout her childhood. Real strength never needs to announce itself. The courtroom remained almost perfectly still. Sunlight climbed higher across the polished floor. Somewhere beyond the heavy wooden doors, another case was being called, another oath administered, another chapter of justice unfolding. Inside courtroom 3, however, something else had quietly begun. Neither Maya nor Daniel realized it yet, but the next few minutes would challenge far more than courtroom procedure. They would reveal how quickly assumptions could stand in the place of truth, and how quietly dignity could change the direction of an entire room. Maya Carter remained exactly where she was after Officer Daniel Brooks finished speaking into his shoulder radio. The quiet hum of the courtroom ventilation blended with the distant footsteps echoing through the marble hallway outside, creating a strange calm that seemed to slow the passing seconds. She rested the leather portfolio gently against the polished wooden railing beside the witness area and folded her hands in front of her. She had spent enough years in uniform to recognize that impatience rarely improved difficult moments. Long before she had entered military service, discipline had become part of her daily life. Maya grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, where every morning began before sunrise. Her father, a retired Navy chief, believed that character was built through small decisions repeated every day. Beds were made with perfect corners. Shoes were polished before breakfast. Promises were kept whether anyone was watching or not. Her mother, an elementary school teacher, filled their home with books instead of expensive furniture. She often reminded Maya that education and integrity would carry her farther than anger ever could. Those lessons followed Maya through every stage of her life. After graduating from college, she chose one of the most demanding paths available, earning the opportunity to serve alongside some of the nation's most highly trained military professionals. The years that followed demanded extraordinary discipline, patience, and teamwork. Recognition was never the goal. Responsibility was. She learned to stay calm when others became overwhelmed, to listen before speaking, and to place the mission above personal pride. Even after leaving active duty, those habits never disappeared. They simply became part of who she was. That quiet professionalism eventually led federal investigators to request her assistance as an expert witness in a complex legal case involving government contracts and national security procedures. Her testimony was expected to clarify technical details that very few people in the courtroom fully understood. Every document inside the leather portfolio had been reviewed repeatedly by federal attorneys and approved through official channels before arriving at the courthouse that morning. None of that preparation showed on Maya's face. She simply waited with the same composed expression she had carried into the building. Officer Brooks glanced toward her again while checking the small screen on his portable radio. Something about her calm demeanor unsettled him more than open disagreement might have. Most people questioned by courthouse security either became defensive or noticeably anxious. Maya did neither. She answered every question directly, never raising her voice, never displaying frustration, and never asking for special treatment. A courtroom deputy quietly walked past carrying several case files before pausing near Daniel. "Everything all right?" he asked softly. Daniel answered without taking his eyes off Maya. "Just verifying credentials." The deputy looked briefly toward Maya, who responded with a polite nod, then continued down the hallway without another word. Sunlight continued drifting across the polished courtroom floor, illuminating the empty witness stand and the American flag standing behind the judge's bench. Maya noticed the familiar scene and found herself remembering another courtroom years earlier where she had testified on behalf of a fellow service member. The same flag had stood behind the bench. The same oath had been spoken. The same promise to tell the truth had guided every answer she gave. For Maya, that promise had never belonged only to a courtroom. It belonged to every part of her life. A soft tone suddenly sounded from Daniel's radio, signaling an incoming response from courthouse security. He lifted the device immediately, expecting a routine confirmation. Maya quietly remained where she was, her posture steady, her attention fixed not on the officer but on the courtroom itself, knowing that before the morning was over, truth would become the only credential that truly mattered. The brief signal from Officer Daniel Brooks's radio faded into a low hiss before a dispatcher finally answered. "Court security to Officer Brooks. Identity verification is still in progress. Please remain on your current assignment." Daniel acknowledged the message, clipped the radio back onto his shoulder, and looked once more toward Maya Carter. Instead of resolving his doubts, the delay only deepened them. He glanced again at the government folder resting beside her. A small federal security seal reflected softly beneath the courtroom lights, but he chose not to draw any conclusions from it. "I still need additional verification," he said. Maya responded with the same calm professionalism she had shown from the beginning. "I understand, officer." Daniel folded his arms. "Until everything is confirmed, I would prefer that you remain away from the witness stand." Maya nodded politely. "That is completely acceptable." Her answer seemed almost unexpected. Daniel had anticipated an argument or at least visible frustration. Instead, she quietly stepped half a pace back from the railing and waited without another word. The silence inside Courtroom 3 became strangely noticeable. Attorneys continued arranging exhibits. A court reporter tested the recording equipment. Several members of the public quietly entered through the rear doors before choosing seats along the polished oak benches. Few people paid attention to the exchange, yet those who did sensed an unusual tension that never erupted into open conflict. Maya rested one hand lightly against the leather portfolio. Inside were carefully organized technical reports, military procedural summaries, and official certifications requested by federal prosecutors weeks earlier. Every document had been reviewed repeatedly before arriving at the courthouse. She knew exactly what the folder contained, but she also understood that its contents were not hers to discuss outside the courtroom. Confidentiality was not simply a legal obligation. It was a promise. Daniel continued watching her from several feet away. Something about her composure challenged the assumptions forming in his mind. He had worked courthouse security long enough to recognize nervous behavior. Witnesses often paced the hallway, checked their phones repeatedly, or rehearsed testimony under their breath. Maya did none of those things. She stood with relaxed shoulders, steady breathing, and the quiet confidence of someone completely comfortable with waiting. The difference unsettled him more than he expected. A federal prosecutor entered through the side door carrying several binders before briefly scanning the courtroom. Maya recognized him immediately as James Walker, the lead attorney assigned to the case. Their eyes met for only an instant before another attorney quietly asked him a question, drawing his attention elsewhere. He disappeared into the judge's conference room without noticing that Maya remained standing near the entrance instead of the witness area, where she had been instructed to report earlier that morning. Daniel interpreted the brief glance differently. To him, it simply appeared that another attorney had overlooked an unfamiliar witness. He reached once more for his radio, this time requesting direct confirmation from the federal clerk assigned to the day's proceedings. While waiting for another response, he glanced toward the heavy wooden doors leading into the hallway. Beyond them, the courthouse gradually grew busier as more cases prepared to begin. The sound of measured footsteps echoed across marble corridors before fading again into quiet. Above the judge's bench, the American flag remained perfectly still beneath the soft morning light streaming through tall windows. Maya looked toward it for a brief moment and remembered the countless mornings she had stood at attention beneath that same flag in places thousands of miles from home. Every oath she had ever taken carried the same meaning. Honor was not something reserved for easy days. It mattered most when circumstances became difficult. She lowered her eyes again just as Daniel's radio emitted another clear tone. This time the incoming call was marked as a priority administrative response, and the expression on his face began to change before a single word had even been spoken. Officer Daniel Brooks lifted the radio from his shoulder the instant the priority signal sounded. His confident posture remained unchanged, but the slight pause before he answered betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "Officer Brooks speaking," he said quietly. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and unmistakably official. "Remain where you are. A representative from the United States Attorney's Office is on the way to Courtroom 3. Do not release or relocate the witness until verification is completed." Daniel acknowledged the instruction and lowered the radio slowly. The response answered very little, yet it carried enough authority to make him reconsider the assumptions he had formed only minutes earlier. Across the courtroom, Maya Carter remained exactly where she had been standing since entering the room. She had not taken a single unnecessary step. The leather portfolio rested against the polished railing beside her, untouched, while warm sunlight continued creeping across the marble floor beneath the tall windows. Around them, the courtroom gradually filled with attorneys, clerks, and spectators speaking in quiet voices that blended into a respectful murmur. No one realized that a simple verification request had quietly delayed one of the most important witnesses scheduled to testify that morning. Daniel walked a few steps closer, careful to maintain a professional tone. "Ma'am, I appreciate your patience." Maya offered a polite nod. "Thank you, officer." He hesitated before asking another question. "How long have you been working with the United States Attorney's Office?" Maya answered honestly. "Only on this case." "So you are not employed there?" "No. I was asked to assist because of my professional experience." Daniel glanced once more toward the government folder. "Professional experience doing what?" Maya smiled faintly without revealing more than necessary. That information will become part of today's testimony. Daniel studied her face, searching for hesitation, but found none. Her voice remained steady. Her breathing remained slow. Every answer was precise, without sounding rehearsed. It was the composure of someone who had spent years making difficult decisions under pressure. A courtroom clerk entered carrying a stack of exhibits and paused beside Daniel. "The judge will take the bench in about 15 minutes, she said. "Is everything ready?" Daniel replied. "We are still confirming witness credentials." The clerk glanced toward Maya with mild surprise. She was expected much earlier. Before Daniel could respond, the clerk continued toward the witness stand, arranging documents with practiced efficiency. Maya quietly watched the courtroom come to life. The court reporter adjusted the recording equipment. Attorneys reviewed highlighted pages one final time. A bailiff checked the placement of microphones before stepping aside. Every movement followed an orderly rhythm that reminded Maya of mission briefings years earlier, where every detail mattered because every detail served a larger purpose. She rested one hand lightly on the edge of the leather portfolio and remembered another lesson from her military career. Preparation was invisible until the moment it became essential. She had learned never to measure people by appearances, uniforms, or titles alone, because real capability often revealed itself only when circumstances demanded it. Daniel folded his arms again, though less rigidly than before. The uncertainty he felt was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. He had expected courthouse security to quickly dismiss Maya's explanation or uncover some simple misunderstanding. Instead, every official response seemed to confirm that her presence was legitimate while withholding details he could not yet access. Just then the heavy wooden courtroom doors opened once more. A man in a dark federal suit carrying a secure credential case stepped inside and scanned the room with immediate purpose. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward Maya. Daniel instinctively turned to intercept him, but the visitor calmly presented a federal identification wallet before speaking. "Good morning. I am Assistant United States Attorney James Walker. I am here for Captain Maya Carter. She is our primary expert witness, and the court is waiting for her." Edit. Assistant United States Attorney James Walker lowered his identification wallet after Officer Daniel Brooks examined it carefully. The courtroom seemed to grow noticeably quieter, not because anyone had asked for silence, but because the atmosphere itself had shifted. Daniel returned the credentials with a respectful nod, though questions still lingered behind his expression. "Sir, I was instructed to verify everyone entering the courtroom," he said. Walker answered without irritation. "And you were correct to verify. That responsibility protects the integrity of this building. However, Captain Maya Carter has been cleared through every federal security requirement associated with today's hearing." Daniel glanced briefly toward Maya before looking back at Walker. No one informed courthouse security about her role. Walker's voice remained calm. "The case is operating under limited disclosure procedures. Only personnel with direct responsibility received complete information." Daniel accepted the explanation but remained thoughtful. Across the room, Maya quietly rested one hand on the leather portfolio while watching attorneys take their places at the counsel tables. The polished courtroom reflected the soft morning light, and the American flag behind the empty bench seemed almost motionless in the still air. She had stood in many rooms where patience mattered more than words, and this morning felt no different. Walker stepped beside Maya with quiet familiarity. "Captain, thank you for arriving early." Maya smiled politely. "I prefer to leave room for the unexpected." Walker gave a knowing nod. "That habit has served us well." Daniel noticed the exchange. The title captain had not been used casually. It carried the natural respect of someone speaking to a trusted professional rather than an ordinary witness. Before he could ask another question, the courtroom clerk approached carrying a sealed envelope marked for the judge. "Mr. Walker," she said softly, "Judge Eleanor Mitchell has requested confirmation that your expert witness is present before opening the session." Walker answered immediately. "She is here." The clerk looked toward Maya with a warm smile. The judge specifically asked that Captain Carter be escorted to the witness preparation room once security procedures were complete. Daniel felt the weight of those words settle quietly across the room. He had expected routine verification to uncover uncertainty. Instead, Every official confirmation strengthened Maya's position even further. Still, Maya showed no sign of satisfaction. She simply thanked the clerk and waited without moving. Walker opened the leather portfolio just enough to confirm the security seals remained intact before closing it again. "Everything is exactly as expected," he said. "These reports will help the court understand technical procedures that only someone with your operational background can fully explain." Maya answered softly, "The facts deserve clarity." Walker smiled. "That is exactly why we asked you to testify." Daniel listened in silence. His earlier confidence had begun giving way to reflection. He replayed each question he had asked since Maya entered the courtroom. None had been openly disrespectful, yet he could not ignore how quickly he had formed conclusions before knowing who she was or why she had been there. The realization settled more heavily than he expected. A gentle chime sounded through the courthouse announcing that proceedings would begin in 5 minutes. Attorneys stood, spectators quietly took their seats, and the low conversations faded into respectful silence. Sunlight reached the front of the courtroom, illuminating the witness stand with a warm glow. Maya looked toward it and quietly remembered the promise she had made when she first entered military service many years earlier. Tell the truth, protect others, honor the oath. Those principles had guided every chapter of her life, and today they would guide her once again. As the courtroom doors closed behind the last spectators, another door near the judge's chambers opened. Judge Eleanor Mitchell stepped into view, and every person in the courtroom rose to their feet. Judge Eleanor Mitchell settled into her chair with quiet authority, and the courtroom rose before returning to their seats at her signal. The room became almost perfectly still. Only the soft rustle of legal papers and the distant hum of the courthouse ventilation remained. Warm morning light continued streaming through the tall windows, illuminating the witness stand where Maya Carter would soon testify. Before the clerk called the first witness, Judge Mitchell looked toward Assistant United States Attorney James Walker. "Counsel, is your expert witness present and prepared?" Walker stood immediately. "Yes, Your Honor." He turned toward Maya with a respectful nod. "Captain Carter is ready." Maya rose calmly, collected the leather portfolio, and walked toward the witness preparation area with measured, confident steps. Every movement reflected years of discipline rather than performance. She did not hurry. She did not seek attention. She simply followed the procedure exactly as instructed. Officer Daniel Brooks watched quietly from his assigned position near the courtroom entrance. The certainty he had carried earlier that morning had slowly dissolved into thoughtful silence. For the first time since Maya entered the courthouse, he stopped seeing only a visitor carrying confidential documents. Instead, he began noticing the details he had overlooked before. The careful organization of every file. The respectful way federal attorneys addressed her. The confidence that required no display. It reminded him of something an older training officer had once told him during his first month on courthouse duty. The strongest professionals usually spend the least time proving they belong. Daniel had forgotten those words until now. Maya paused briefly beside the witness room door and looked toward the American flag standing behind the judge's bench. The polished brass eagle at the top reflected a narrow beam of sunlight across the courtroom ceiling. For a brief moment, memories returned without warning. She remembered standing in formation years earlier before dawn, cool ocean air moving across the training grounds while the same flag rose slowly against the morning sky. She remembered fellow service members who had taught her that courage often looked surprisingly quiet. It was found in preparation, integrity, and the willingness to carry responsibility even when no recognition followed. Those lessons had remained with her long after active service ended. They guided her now more than ever. She rested one hand gently against the leather portfolio and silently repeated the promise she had carried through every assignment of her career. Speak truthfully. Serve faithfully. Leave every place better than you found it. The words settled her thoughts completely. Outside the witness room, Daniel noticed the calm expression on Maya's face and realized that throughout the entire morning, she had never once raised her voice, challenged his authority, or responded with anger. She had simply trusted that the process would eventually reveal the truth. That realization carried unexpected weight. Across the courtroom, spectators waited quietly, unaware that the woman preparing to testify had spent years serving the country before returning home to serve justice in another way. The courtroom clock moved 1 minute closer to the hour. Judge Mitchell reviewed the docket while the clerk arranged the final exhibits. Assistant United States Attorney Walker stood beside the prosecution table, reviewing his notes one last time before looking toward the witness room. He smiled with quiet confidence, knowing the testimony about to begin would provide clarity the court had been seeking for months. A soft knock sounded on the witness room door. The courtroom deputy opened it respectfully and nodded toward Maya. "Captain Carter, the court is ready for you." Maya answered with a calm smile, picked up the leather portfolio, and stepped forward into the light, carrying not only official documents but the quiet strength that had defined her entire life. Captain Maya Carter walked toward the witness stand with quiet confidence, the leather portfolio resting securely in her hands. Every eye in the courtroom followed her, though she seemed unaware of the attention. She paused beside the witness chair as the courtroom deputy administered the oath. Her voice remained steady as she affirmed that every word she would offer would be truthful. Judge Eleanor Mitchell gave a small nod before turning toward Assistant United States Attorney James Walker. "You may proceed." Walker approached with a single folder in his hand instead of beginning with questions. "Your Honor, before Captain Carter provides her technical testimony, the United States respectfully requests that Exhibit 1 be entered into the record for identification purposes." The courtroom clerk accepted the folder and carried it to the judge. Judge Mitchell opened it slowly, reading the first page before quietly looking back toward Maya. "The request is granted." Walker then turned toward the witness stand. "Captain Carter, would you please state your professional background for the record?" Maya answered calmly. "I served in the United States Navy for more than 12 years. During that time, I completed advanced operational assignments, leadership training, and specialized mission planning. After leaving active duty, I continued supporting federal agencies as a technical consultant on security procedures and operational standards." The courtroom remained completely silent. Walker continued, "Your Honor, the witness's qualifications are supported by official service records already admitted under seal." Judge Mitchell nodded once. "The court acknowledges Captain Carter's credentials." The clerk displayed a certified summary on the courtroom monitor. Without revealing confidential operational details, it listed years of honorable military service, multiple commendations for leadership, advanced instructor certifications, and subsequent appointments as an advisor on federal security matters. Several spectators quietly leaned forward to read the display. Even experienced attorneys exchanged brief glances of recognition. Officer Daniel Brooks stood motionless near the courtroom entrance. His eyes moved from the monitor back to Maya, then toward the leather portfolio he had questioned earlier that morning. Piece by piece, every unanswered question now found its place. She had never exaggerated her role. She had never attempted to impress anyone. She had simply answered every question honestly while allowing official procedures to speak for themselves. Walker approached the witness stand again. "Captain Carter, were you asked to assist this investigation because of your military experience and professional expertise?" Maya answered without hesitation. "Yes." "Did you prepare the technical assessments contained within the sealed reports submitted to this court?" "Yes." "Were those reports independently reviewed by federal investigators before today's hearing?" "Yes." Walker smiled slightly before returning to counsel table. There was no need for dramatic language. The facts carried enough weight on their own. Judge Mitchell looked across the courtroom. "The witness is recognized by this court as an expert in the areas presented within the submitted record." Daniel lowered his eyes briefly. He remembered every assumption he had made before learning who Maya truly was. More importantly, he remembered how patiently she had responded despite each unnecessary delay. The realization settled heavily upon him. Across the room, Maya remained exactly as she had been from the beginning of the morning. Calm, respectful, focused entirely on helping the court understand the truth. The sunlight reaching through the tall courtroom windows now rested across the witness stand, surrounding the polished wood with a warm golden glow. In that quiet light, Maya's years of service were no longer hidden behind an ordinary business suit or a simple leather portfolio. They had become visible through her integrity, her professionalism, and the unwavering discipline that no assumption could ever diminish. The courtroom remained remarkably quiet after Judge Eleanor Mitchell formally recognized Captain Maya Carter as an expert witness. No dramatic reaction followed, only a thoughtful silence that seemed to settle over every person seated beneath the tall windows. Assistant United States Attorney James Walker resumed his questioning, carefully guiding Maya through the technical findings contained in the sealed reports. She explained complex operational procedures using clear, measured language that even those without military experience could understand. Each answer was concise, factual, and supported by official documentation already admitted into evidence. There was no need for exaggeration because the truth itself carried sufficient weight. Jurors listened attentively while attorneys on both sides followed each explanation with careful notes. Judge Mitchell occasionally nodded as particularly technical concepts became unexpectedly understandable through Maya's calm testimony. Throughout the proceedings, Maya never attempted to draw attention to her years of service or the responsibilities she had carried. She focused entirely on helping the court understand the facts placed before it. Near the courtroom entrance, Officer Daniel Brooks stood quietly at his assigned position. The responsibilities of courthouse security had not changed, but his perspective had. He replayed the morning repeatedly in his mind, remembering every question he had asked before learning who Maya truly was. None of his words had violated procedure, yet he recognized how easily assumptions had influenced his judgment before complete information became available. The realization was uncomfortable, but impossible to ignore. During a brief recess, Judge Mitchell stepped down from the bench while attorneys organized exhibits for the next session. Spectators quietly stretched their legs, speaking in hushed voices throughout the courtroom. Daniel waited until the area around the witness stand had cleared before walking toward Maya with measured steps. She had just finished placing several documents back into the leather portfolio when she noticed him approaching. She looked up with the same calm expression she had worn all morning. Daniel removed his courthouse cap and held it respectfully at his side. "Captain Carter," he began quietly, "I would like to apologize." Maya listened without interrupting. Daniel continued, choosing each word carefully. "My responsibility is to protect this courthouse and everyone inside it. I believe in that responsibility. But today I allowed my first impression to shape my judgment before I understood the full situation. You answered every question professionally, and you treated me with respect from the very beginning. I should have shown you the same confidence that you showed me." Maya remained silent for a brief moment before offering a gentle smile. "Officer Brooks, protecting a courthouse is an important responsibility. Asking questions is part of that responsibility." Daniel nodded. "There is a difference between asking questions and making assumptions. I understand that more clearly now." Maya closed the leather portfolio and rested one hand lightly across its cover. Every public servant carries trust. Whether someone wears a military uniform, a courthouse badge, or a business suit, people deserve to be treated with fairness before conclusions are reached. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly before looking back at her. "Thank you for reminding me of that." Maya extended her hand. Daniel accepted it with quiet gratitude. The handshake lasted only a moment, but it carried more meaning than either of them expressed aloud. Assistant United States Attorney James Walker watched the exchange from across the courtroom and smiled almost imperceptibly before returning to his files. Judge Mitchell re-entered through the side door moments later, and the courtroom deputy announced that proceedings would resume. As everyone returned to their places, the atmosphere felt noticeably different. Nothing about the courtroom itself had changed. The marble floors, polished benches, and sunlight filtering through the tall windows remained exactly as before. What had changed were the people standing within that light, each carrying a deeper understanding that dignity, professionalism, and respect could accomplish what assumptions never would. The afternoon sunlight had shifted by the time the final questions were answered. Golden light stretched across the polished courtroom floor, reflecting softly against the dark wood of the witness stand where Captain Maya Carter had spent the past several hours explaining facts with quiet precision. When Assistant United States Attorney James Walker announced that he had no further questions, Judge Eleanor Mitchell looked down from the bench with a thoughtful expression before addressing the courtroom. "Captain Carter, the court appreciates your professionalism and the clarity of your testimony. Your assistance has been valuable to these proceedings." Maya inclined her head respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor." There was no celebration, no dramatic applause, only the quiet acknowledgement that an important responsibility had been fulfilled. Judge Mitchell concluded the morning session with the measured strike of her gavel, and people slowly began gathering documents, closing notebooks, and leaving the courtroom in calm conversation. Maya carefully placed the final exhibit back inside the leather portfolio before securing the clasp exactly as she had done countless times throughout her career. Order had always brought her peace. As she walked toward the courtroom doors, several attorneys paused to thank her for making highly technical information understandable. She accepted each compliment with the same modest smile, always redirecting the credit toward teamwork and preparation rather than herself. Outside the courtroom, the wide marble hallway glowed beneath tall windows overlooking the courthouse lawn. Officer Daniel Brooks waited quietly near one of the stone columns. This time he did not stand there as a gatekeeper. He stood there simply as another public servant finishing an ordinary workday that no longer felt ordinary. When Maya approached, he offered a respectful nod. "Captain Carter." She returned the greeting warmly. "Officer Brooks." He smiled, the expression noticeably more relaxed than it had been that morning. "I have been thinking about something you said, that every public servant carries trust." Maya nodded gently. "It is something my father taught me many years ago." Daniel looked toward the American flag visible through the courtroom doors. "I think I understood the words this morning. I understand the meaning now." Maya followed his gaze. "Learning never stops. That is true for all of us." They shook hands once more before continuing in opposite directions through the courthouse. Neither looked back. Both carried something more valuable than winning an argument. They carried a lesson that would quietly shape every decision made afterward. Several weeks later, Judge Mitchell referenced the hearing during a statewide judicial conference focused on professionalism within the justice system. Without naming individuals, she spoke about the importance of allowing facts, preparation, and fairness to guide every courtroom interaction. Her remarks were later shared during training sessions for courthouse personnel across the district. Daniel attended one of those sessions voluntarily. He listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and became known among newer officers for reminding them that respect should never depend upon appearances or assumptions. Maya never sought recognition for any of it. She continued serving as a federal consultant, helping investigators and attorneys understand complex operational procedures with the same humility she had shown throughout the hearing. On a quiet autumn evening, she visited the waterfront in Norfolk where she had grown up. The Chesapeake Bay reflected the fading sunlight in gentle waves while distant ships moved steadily toward the horizon. She stood for several minutes beside the railing, listening to the wind and remembering the countless lessons that had shaped her life. Discipline, honor, patience, compassion, none of them demanded attention. They simply revealed themselves through daily choices. As the last light settled across the water, Maya smiled softly and turned toward home. Behind her, the evening breeze carried the American flag above the harbor with quiet dignity, and in that peaceful silence, justice felt less like a verdict and more like a promise that truth, when carried with integrity, would always find its way into the light.